putting this story together. In South Shields, they're talking about possible gangland links to the shooting and murder of someone else at the site of the North's most infamous ambush spot. And yet if you go back to the days of the Roman occupation, south of the Tyne was considered rather safer than all points north. That big river, the Tyne, acting as a natural barrier to keep the invader from the two tribes that were most likely to kill them, the Northumbrian Brigantes or any of the Scottish clans. Yet a rich Roman trader had been cheating pretty much everybody that he dealt with right across the north. This he could easily do, as he had armed men to encourage his clients to sell him things at the most ridiculous prices. Any price is better than being blinded or having your child taken into the Roman army, or worse, having your daughter taken into one of their brothels. So Castros of Florenzi took his trade deep into Northumbria, visiting Alnwick, Hexham and every tiny village and hamlet in between. Yet while stopping off at a village where Dudley currently stands next to Cramlington, he began negotiating with a farmer there known as Edmund to purchase 3 magnificent stallions. The farmer insisted that none were for sale as they were his breeding stock. Without them, his large herd of breeding mares would be useless. After a severe beating, he begged the Roman trader to let him keep 1 so he could stay in business. Despite losing an eye and being crippled, he fought as best he could to maintain a living for his family. Castros did let him keep 1, then ordered his men to geld it. He left laughing in his cart, dragging behind him 2 beautiful horses bought for 1/50th of their value. And later that night, Edmund heard that the previous evening Castros had allowed 3 of his men to rape his 14-year-old daughter. She'd stayed silent, knowing that they would kill her father. And yet, despite a nasty sword wound to his side and an eye that had been pierced with a sword tip, he picked up a staff and a cudgel and headed off after the trader. And as he went, he gathered some of his friends together as a form of early posse. It was a waste of time going to the Roman consul, for the word of any Roman would be put before anyone else's. And it took almost 3 weeks before they discovered them camped where the car park at Marsden Grotto now stands. This was just far enough from other villages, and few would dare travelling along that dark, inhospitable coastal path at night. At the time, it was a woodland clearing with tall trees right up to the cliff edge, so Edmund and his men had no difficulty getting within 10 feet of the sleeping Roman. A diversion was created by hurling a live goat over the cliff edge some 20 feet away, making the 2 guards run off to investigate. They were set upon by 8 men with clubs who beat them unconscious. 3 other soldiers who were also sleeping were beaten into an even deeper sleep. Finally, Edmund pulled back the flap of Castro's tent to see him lying there with a boy aged around 8. The youngster looked terrified and Edmund beckoned him out. He then placed a noose around the Roman's neck before splashing his face with the remnants of a flagon of wine. Castros awoke in a fury until he saw the bloodied face of Edmund. His men held the Roman's arms as the vengeance began. The Roman offered to let him take his horses back, but this was not a bargaining chip because he planned to do that anyway, and share all of the Roman's other misgotten gains with his friends. Edmund held a knife up against the man's eye, saying, "Have you any idea how it feels to kill a living eye?" And at that he jabbed it in just enough to pop it. A mixture of aqueous humour and blood trickled down his cheek. The Roman began howling, begging for his life, begging for his freedom. There are many in life who can dish it out, but very few can actually take it. Then with a curved knife, the Roman's side was ripped open. And finally, Edmund gave a tiny knife to Castros. Looking at him with his only good eye, he said, "Your men raped my little Gwynny, and for that you must cut off your vitals. Do this and you live. Do not, and I will kill you with my bare hands." Realizing how desperate his plight was, he tried to sever his own penis. But the blade was quite blunt and he tried sawing at it. But that just created long, ragged cuts. "Hurry!" shouted Edmund, who knew that if a Roman patrol should stumble across them, they'd all be executed. For minutes that surely felt like hours, he tried to remove his penis and sack, leaving it a bloodied mess. Finally, Edmund strode forward, hit the Roman in the nose with a cudgel, and as he fell to his knees, with one swish of a sharpened blade, the man's vitals were then thrown into his face. The Roman was wobbling around, clutching the open wound where his balls had been. Edmund said, "Run, lest I change my mind," and the farmer pointed the direction for him to run, between two very big dark oak trees. The trader was barely able to walk until a sword point pierced his back, encouraging him to try that bit harder. Yet Edmund had pointed him to the cliff, and the Roman stepped out into nothing. Then about 10 feet down, the noose was pulled tight, breaking his neck and almost ripping his head off. The following morning, there were a group of Roman soldiers with headaches, yet not one who could identify those who had waylaid them. This one area of the northeast coast has a catalogue of murder and ambushes. For almost 400 years, it was a tiny coastal track with heavy woodland on both sides of the road. The perfect place for highwaymen or assailants to trap you and drag you away from prying eyes. It's known that around 560 people have been attacked and murdered on that very site. In more recent years, one of South Shield's more famous residents featured here too. Dolly Peel was perhaps South Shield's most famous fishwife. She also sold contraband, smuggled wine, and had dealings in illegal tobacco and liquor. She had a rather bawdy tavern in Shields near the old Coble landings, so that fishermen couldn't resist to pop in as soon as they got back with their catch. Yet Marsden was the place where much of her illegal stock was landed and hidden inside Marsden Rock, where even today you can see the deep-carved smuggler's hidey-hole. The authorities knew she was doing these things, but just could never prove it. So instead, they sent a press gang to grab her husband and made him crew of a man-of-war. Rather than let him go, she forced her way on board, saying that she would operate the cockpit, and this she did, providing food and medical care. She also delivered 2 babies in the space between the cannons, hence the phrase, "to be a son of a gun." Dolly and her husband Robert returned to South Shields to find even fewer customs men than ever. So basically picked up from where she'd left off, setting up another rowdy inn near Marsden. And there's a poem from Dolly around that time. It's usually claimed to be anonymous, but many think Dolly did it. Those salty swearing sea dogs and tarry buccaneers with backy pipes, pigtails and gold rings in their ears, who spent their money handsome and took their ease ashore in my rowdy bar in Marsden with much sand across the floor. They bawled out many a ballad and all told thumping lies in fearsome deep-sea lingo that opened a landsman's eyes. They drained their brimming pewter and spat into the tide in many a galleried tavern along our blood-soaked waterside. Watching at their moorings the old Geordie colliers roll and the press gang tender waiting outside of Peggy's hole. The anchored ships upload their silks and laces fine with spices from the Indies along with rum and Spanish wine. They watched the busy scullers all plying with their fares from ships, from docks, from landings all along Penny Pie stairs. And they saw the sturdy keelmen passing to and fro as the Shields men did on this old river, just to watch 'em come and go. So what happened to Dolly? Well, we know she made herself a small fortune and decided to sell it to a fellow smuggler to top up her so-called retirement fund. The fellow black marketer was known as Douglas and had agreed to meet her at the top of the cliffs at Marsden. Her carriage loaded with her entire belongings in readiness to move to start again around Whitby in the south. We know that the smuggler tried to kill her. Some say that he succeeded. because on nights when the sea fret comes in, you often see a rather rotund, dark figure striding through the mist. It's said to be Dolly's ghost, looking out for a last treasure trove. There have been many sightings on an already seriously haunted bit of countryside, but the most convincing made by two police officers in 1962. PC Armstrong and PC Hill were parked up having a flask of tea. It was pouring with rain and the sea fret rolled in like a tablecloth. We called the rain nature's best policeman, so decided to grab a cuppa, said PC Armstrong. Hilly was pouring out a big tartan flask when we both clearly saw this woman walking towards us. She was wearing a long gown and was soaking wet. I told Hilly to look up, and just as she got between our headlights, he got a right start. He spilt the tea. And I wondered what the daft old mare was doing out in this awful weather. So I grabbed my coat and helmet and I jumped out the car so as we could get her in the warm and we could have driven her home. Yet while the headlights were still on, with her just about 10 feet from the car, she just disappeared. We never ever parked up there again. Mind you, Hilly told me that he saw her again about 4 weeks later when driving past the Rock. In the century up to 2000, there have been over 2,600 sightings in this area. These have included figures getting run into, cars going through figures on the road, and figures seen in the rear view mirror of cars.
I hit this bloke who had like a green jumper on, blue jeans. I saw him as clear as day. He hit the windscreen and went across the top of the car.
Right.
Well, you can imagine Tony was actually sitting where this guy hit, and we could feel the bump, we heard the bump, and we saw him. And we were just absolutely devastated.
And I presume you pulled in straight away?
I stopped the car straight away, put my hazards on.
Yeah.
And we sat there for what seemed like ages, just looking at each other saying, what the hell do we do here? But it must have been seconds, literally, but it seemed like forever. And I thought, no, to hell with this. I got out the car, thought, right, there's going to be at least an injured person here, maybe a dead person here.
Sure, terrifying.
So I walked behind the car. Now you can imagine, I've got the hazards on, all my lights were on, I put the full beam on because it was dark. And there was nobody there.
Right.
In the road. So I went back to Tony. I said, Tony, I really need your help because it's all bushes along that side of the road. I think the guy's either gone into the bushes or gone into the ditch. So you can imagine, we're feeling around for a body in this ditch.
Terrifying.
And shouting, hello, hello, you know, are you all right? Or you're all this kind of lot. He's going up the road, I'm going down the road.
Yeah.
And we must have gone about 50 yards either way of the car.
Yeah.
Nothing. Not a thing anywhere. So basically we were left looking at each other thinking, what the hell was that?
Yeah.
Because both of us, it just happened, you know, that there is no doubt about it. We didn't imagine it. We heard the bump, we felt the impact on the car, we actually saw the person.
Question, is the car marked?
Not a mark
Not a
on it.
scratch on it?
Well, what I did was, we sort of looked at each other for a bit, I said, well, what I need to do now is I need to go and ring the police.
Yeah.
Because
if a body crops up somewhere.
Yeah. And there could be an injured person lying somewhere where we can't see him in these bushes. So I came home. This was the bit that got me. And you can imagine the state we're in. We just didn't speak a word all the way home. Yeah. I got home. First thing I did was dial 999, and I told them. And the guy was like, yeah. And I'm like, I really hit this man. I'm really sorry I didn't see him. He just came from nowhere. I hit him, but he's obviously out there somewhere lying injured or perhaps worse, so we need to get him some help. And he's just like, oh, it's okay, it's just another one, don't worry about it. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
Huh? What?
They're coming on that road, I'm afraid.
Well, the thing that got me was, I thought, well, that's a bit of a strange reaction. But the thing that clinched it for me, it was about 6 months later, and I'm driving along the same road in a different car, but with me mum this time. And obviously, I hadn't forgotten about it, but I hadn't thought about it. It was, I just put it to the back of my mind.
Sure.
And I said to me mum, I said, oh, you'll never believe what happened, blah, blah, blah. And I recounted the whole story. And she's like, no, you must have been imagining it. Must have been, a flashing light or something. A fire engine's gone over the top or something. And I tried to explain, no, I definitely hit this guy. And I looked to see me mum, to see if she had like a sarcastic look on her face. And as I looked past me mother. And I could see what appeared to be on the bank, although it was dark, it wasn't really late at night, it was about 9 o'clock-ish. There seemed to be somebody lying on the bank and somebody kneeling over the top of them.
Right.
As though they were trying to help them.
Yeah.
And I went, hey, what's going on there? My mum goes, what? And when I looked, there was nothing there.
Right.
And I thought, oh, I'm just obviously going, look here, I have to be totally mental, so...
Well, the truth of the story is, both ends of that road, because you were quite a long way south on it, if you know what I mean, because you're coming close to the roundabout that takes you off to the Tyne Tunnel. At the top end of that road, when you just come onto the Spine Road, from there right the way down that whole place, there's been hundreds, not just one or two, hundreds of people have said, I rammed into somebody. That going over the bonnet is not uncommon, funnily enough.
He didn't go over the bonnet because he actually hit the wing of the car, but he did
clipped.
go over the windscreen. Like I could see his left arm down his left side and his left leg clearly go over the top.
Yeah. A lot of people have experienced clipping somebody, knocking them into a ditch. Other people have had the freaky thing where they've seen somebody at the last moment standing right in the middle of the road, and if you actually look down that road, you will see loads of emergency stop tyre tread on the road. And I know it sounds weird, but if you look down that road, just count how many of those black stripes that you see on that road, because the last guy who rang me about that said he saw a man standing right in the middle of the road, and he was checking the road ahead. There was nothing there. Then suddenly there was this man in the middle. He put his anchors on, he tried to stay straight, and he ended up going sideways. And when he stopped, he said the face of the man was physically inside his car, and then he was gone within a split second. And he said he nearly had a heart attack.
Well, we actually felt the impact. We heard the impact. And the last thing I did, I'd never thought, when you asked about the car, I never thought about the car once.
Sure, you were more concerned about him.
This guy, I did. I thought we'd killed him. And I couldn't understand where the hell he came from, because 1 second he wasn't there, and then next second he was flying over my roof. So the next morning, when I was thinking, I wonder what's happened. And I was actually watching the news that night to see
if there was a body found
or anything like that. And the next morning I thought, but what about the car? Should I report this to the insurance company? You see, to me it was a legitimate accident.
Sure.
All the way along the line. And when I looked at the car, Alan, I swear to God, there wasn't so much as a brush mark on it.
You're not covered for dead people anyway. In 1946, returning Royal Engineer David Barris was in his car driving along the road when he saw a figure by the side of it, and it appeared to be a slightly stooped woman who appeared to be struggling with something. On pulling over, he ran up to help her, and as she turned around, she had no face, and the things she was carrying were blue-faced bodies of two dead children hanging like rag dolls. Donald screamed, ran back to his car, raged into South Shields to the police station to report it. They never pursued it, possibly thinking he was suffering post-traumatic stress. In 1991, Barris wrote, "It was clear as day the woman was as solid as I am, and I felt the weight of those two dead children, both little girls. It sounds unbelievable, and I wouldn't believe it if I were to hear you tell the tale. Yet I saw, felt, and will have that image in my mind for all time, and I now sincerely wish I did not." In 2004, Martin Johnson from South Shields was driving home after visiting pals in Hartlepool. He had a can of Coke open, and feeling thirsty, he pulled over into the Grotto car park to have a swig. He was necking it when he caught a glimpse of a black shadow on his back seat. And just then, he heard an old lady say, Can you spare an old lady a drink? He jumped out of the car, yet on staring in through the windows, the car was empty. Just finally, in December 2010, during the horrific snowstorms, local car salesman Gordon Allen was driving home from his job on the Silver Link when he spotted someone trudging through the snow near the Grotto car park. He was in his four-wheel drive, and whilst the world's wheels were spinning, they were going nowhere. He was battling on through the drifts. This woman was a good distance away from any houses, so I pulled in to see if she needed help. At first she didn't turn to face me, but I kept shouting, and finally she did. Gordon's face turned white as he explained that although her shape was very round and quite fat, under a kind of headscarf, all she had was rotting flesh for a face. That's all I can explain it as, he said. Rotting flesh. She looked at me with her sockets because the eyes had gone, and there was no blood, just a sort of grey flesh with a white skull behind it. I began to put my foot down on the throttle but never moved. I panicked and I waved the wheel from side to side, and then the car took off. I looked in my mirrors. She'd gone. My heart was thumping. My insides were in turmoil. And about a mile away, I pulled into a bus stop, and although I'd given up smoking, I'd packed it in. I had kept a packet behind the front seat, in the pocket there. And as I turned around, there she was on the back seats. I pulled my head back, slamming it off the roof, and opened the door, falling out into the snow, breaking my wrist as I did. And then I heard this old croaky voice. She was asking me for a drink. I was out of there. Despite the pain and the driving snow, I didn't return to the car until almost an hour had passed by. And then she was gone. I drove up to the hospital. The staff all laughed at me. I'm a grown man, but she was there. It seems the place of probably the most murders and ambushes is now left with famous Shields character Dolly Peel, who now seems certain to have lost her life there on the edge of a long-earned retirement. Now, she spends evenings looking for a good Samaritan, someone who will ignore the decaying flesh that falls rotting from her open skull, someone who will share a drink with her.